My name is David Evans from the Center for Global Development, and I'll be presenting the paper, Are Teachers in Africa Poorly Paid? Evidence from 15 Countries. This is joint work with Fei Yuan of the Harvard Graduate School of Education and Dion Filmer of the World Bank. Africa will need a lot more teachers in the coming years. UNESCO estimates that in order to achieve universal primary education in the next decade, 6.3 million teachers will need to be recruited, some for new teaching posts and some to replace retiring teachers. For secondary education, that number is even bigger. We also need quality teachers. The figure on the right shows that the difference in quality of teachers has an enormous impact on student learning. Africa needs teachers, and it needs those teachers to perform. The level of teacher pay is one important element in attracting good candidates to become teachers. At the same time, teacher strikes are common throughout Africa and beyond. These can lead to significant disruptions in student learning. Pay levels aren't the only demand, but they are usually among teachers' demands. So the question we ask is, how are teachers across Africa paid relative to other workers with similar skills and experience? Previous researchers have examined this in the region, including Sajitha Bashir and others in their Facing Forward report, and a range of researchers in other regions, looking at both at teachers and at public sector workers more generally. Specifically, in this paper we assembled data from representative population or labor force surveys across 15 African nations and 5 comparator nations in other regions. Today, in the interest of time, I'll focus on our results from Africa. We compare salaries for teachers to other wage workers of similar age, education, rural-urban sector, and gender. We also compare benefits for teachers and other workers, and salaries and benefits for fixed-term versus permanent contract teachers. We also examine some associations, for example, the association between teacher pay and structural factors that might explain teacher wage differentials, like unionization, female labor force participation, and other economic factors. We also look at the association between teacher pay and student learning. To be clear up front, in this paper we don't focus on teacher pay that is contingent on student performance. There is a rich, growing literature on teacher performance pay with evidence from Kenya, Rwanda, Tanzania, Uganda, and elsewhere. In this paper, we complement that literature by helping to understand teacher pay levels. We assemble survey data from a mix of middle-income countries like Nigeria and Ghana, and low-income countries like Liberia and Malawi. We include Francophone countries like the Democratic Republic of the Congo and Senegal, and Anglophone countries like Sierra Leone and Zambia. Our binding selection criteria were countries for which we could identify nationally representative household survey data from the last 10 years. For our comparator countries, we selected countries with a similar mix of income levels. I won't focus on those today, but I encourage you to read the paper. Our main data source are individuals who self-identify as primary or secondary school teachers in household and labor force surveys compared to other workers. We exclude primary teachers with only primary education, as these tend to represent a selected sample of teachers, usually near the end of their careers. For some additional analysis, we use complementary data, like the PASEC survey of teachers and student test scores in Francophone Africa from 2014, UNESCO data on the size of the teacher labor force, and test score data from the World Bank. Who are these other workers that we're comparing teachers to? The biggest single group is workers in services or sales workers, as you can see at the bottom of the figure. But we also have professionals, technicians, clerks, and workers in elementary occupations, which tend to be more manual labor, but still only those in wage jobs with at least a secondary education. Let's start off with some descriptive statistics about teachers. First, how old are teachers relative to other workers? What you can see is that in almost every country in our sample, teachers are older than other workers. On average, as you can see from the bar at the bottom, this amounts to just a couple of years, but in some countries, like Liberia and Uganda, that difference is even larger. Second, what proportion of teachers are female? Across our 15 countries, on average, nearly 40% of teachers are women. You can see that at the bottom of the figure in the blue line. So teaching is male-dominated in most of our countries. A handful of countries have a majority female teaching force: Namibia, Niger, Nigeria, Tanzania, and Zambia. Still, among other workers, less than 30% of workers are female. So while still male-dominated on average, teaching is one formal sector occupation that provides more opportunities for women. There are a few countries where that doesn't hold, where teachers are less likely to be women than other workers: Cote d'Ivoire, Liberia, and Senegal. Third, in discussions about the teaching profession, contract teachers often come up, by which we usually refer to teachers on fixed term rather than permanent contracts. We observe lots of variation in the percentage of teachers on fixed term contracts, ranging from just about 5% in Tanzania to more than 40% in Cote d'Ivoire. Any discussion of salaries makes more sense if we understand the relative supply of workers in the field. We track the proportion of primary school teachers relative to the overall labor force. That's the dashed line. Along with the ratio of primary teachers to students. That's the solid line. Across the countries in our sample of household surveys using UNESCO data. There's too much missing data to do this with secondary school teachers. What we find is that there are no countries in our sample in which the fraction of teachers in the labor force has fallen substantively. The proportion has risen sharply in several countries. You can see Burkina Faso on the slide, but also the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Sierra Leone, Tanzania, and Zambia. At the same time, the fraction of teachers in the labor force has risen modestly in some countries. You can see Cote d'Ivoire on the slide. It's also true in Malawi. And the proportion of teachers in the labor force has stayed roughly constant in other countries like the Gambia. Furthermore, the teacher-student ratio, remember that's the solid line, has also risen in many countries. In other words, smaller class sizes. So the rise in teachers cannot entirely be explained by rising enrollment. The average rise across the continent potentially suggests some combination of increasing demand for teachers and that teaching is seen as a desirable profession. Now let's move on to the part that you've all been waiting for. What about teacher pay? First, here's a little bit of descriptive information. On the left, we report monthly earnings from teachers' main teaching job relative to GDP per capita versus earnings from other workers' main job. As you can see, there's a mix, with teachers paid more in some countries like Burkina Faso, Cote d'Ivoire, and Malawi, and less in others like Niger and Sierra Leone. If we break out the other workers, on average, teachers earn about the same monthly pay as technicians and professionals. But if you look at the hours that teachers and other workers report, teachers report fewer hours in every country for which we have data. This isn't some official statistic. This is the teachers' own reports of their weekly hours on the job. We see a lot of variation across countries in the ratio of earnings for teachers on fixed-term and permanent contracts. The average across countries, as you can see at the bottom, is 71%. In other words, fixed-term contract teachers are making 71% of what teachers on permanent contracts do, with the lowest ratio in Cote d'Ivoire and the highest in the Democratic Republic of the Congo and in Sierra Leone. Obviously, the fact that teachers with fixed-term contracts earn more than teachers with permanent contracts in Sierra Leone is a surprise. For what it's worth, that's entirely driven by secondary school teachers. We also examine how likely teachers are to have a second job. Fewer than half of teachers have a second job in any of our countries, but notably, they are much more likely to have a second job than other workers in almost our entire sample. On average, as you can see at the bottom, teachers are more than 50% more likely to have a second job than other workers. Now let's see the results of some regressions. We regress earnings on a teacher dummy as well as an indicator of whether or not the worker has post-secondary education. Remember that everyone in our sample has completed secondary school, their age, their gender, and whether or not they are in an urban area. This figure shows the monthly and hourly wage premium for teachers. If we can start at the bottom, we see that on average, teachers don't earn a monthly wage premium relative to other workers. That's the orange line, although they also don't earn less. But hourly, that's the blue line, teachers earn 26% more. This definitely is not true in every country. In Liberia, Nigeria, and Uganda, even teachers' hourly pay is lower than other workers. Every country is distinct. Okay, so that's salary, but what about other benefits? In this figure, we show the average benefits across our 15-country sample for three groups: all teachers in yellow, fixed-term contract teachers in blue, and other workers in green. We find that on average, across our sample, teachers are more likely to receive paid leave, medical benefits, and pensions than other workers. This is even true for teachers on fixed-term contracts, although the differential is smaller. Next, we check whether the teacher wage premium across countries is correlated with structural factors of the economy. We find no significant correlations between the teacher wage premium and GDP per capita, the percentage of wage workers in the workforce, the percentage of women in other wage jobs, female labor force participation rate, the rate of teacher unionization, teachers as a fraction of the labor force, or even the growth rate of teachers as a fraction of the labor force. We do find that teacher pay rises as GDP per capita rises, but more slowly than GDP per capita does. Teacher pay premia aren't set at random, but they aren't driven by these likely suspects. Finally, we examine the association between teacher pay and student test scores using the harmonized test scores from the World Bank's Human Capital Index. As you can see, we observe a positive association. We observe the same association across schools within Francophone African countries using PASEC data. This figure shows the result of a simple regression of teacher salaries, technically the midpoint of teacher salary bins, on student test scores. We report both the simple correlation in orange and with a range of teacher controls in blue. Statistically significant associations are filled in. Those that are not statistically significant are empty. As you can see, on average, in the top row, teacher salaries and student test scores are positively, statistically significantly correlated. Across countries, the sign and significance varies, but most are positive and about half are positive and significant. This clearly isn't a causal estimate. Countries and schools that pay teachers more may have lots of elements that are different, but it is consistent with cross-country work by Hanushek and others published last year showing a similar association. We know from evidence by DeRee and others in Indonesia that flat increases in teacher pay don't automatically boost teacher effort and student learning. But this association may remind us that over time, teacher pay may affect the composition of the profession. In this paper, we show that across 15 countries in Africa, monthly wages are often, but not always, lower. But so are reported hours, so hourly wages are often higher. Teachers are more likely to have a second job than other workers, and even fixed-term contract teachers tend to receive more benefits than other workers. There's no clear association between teacher pay premia and structural aspects of the economy. Now, this research can't tell ministers of finance or of education what level to set their teachers' salaries and benefits at, but they can tell us where teachers tend to be underpaid and where they don't. Thank you very much.